Holy cow, guys, because what just detonated inside of Minneapolis, this is not a local story anymore. This is national. This is historic. And after what we're witnessing right now, this could become the biggest political confrontation of Donald Trump's presidency and the largest welfare fraud takedown in modern American history. Now, tonight, Minneapolis is not just under federal investigation. This is an open revolt. Federal agents are sweeping the city. ICE teams are targeting what investigators now believe is this billion-dollar Somali-linked fraud network that siphoned taxpayer money for years. And just as President Trump's fraud police moved in, city leaders tried to block them, literally issuing orders to keep federal agents off public property. A sitting American city refusing to cooperate with federal law enforcement. Meanwhile, the numbers climb into the billions. This ain't politics. This is a collision course, guys. And then Stephen Miller stepped in. And when he called this the greatest theft of taxpayer dollars ever recorded, the political earthquake reached Washington. Files are being pulled, visas are being reviewed, arrests are already happening, not just in Minnesota, but across the country, all 50 states. This is judgment day for an entire system that rotted from the inside out. And tonight, Minneapolis is fighting back against the president of the United States. You can't even make this stuff up, guys. Stick with me, guys, because what comes next, this is going to shock you. Hit the like button and subscribe. I really appreciate your support here, guys. Ladies and gentlemen, the moment Trump signed his new federal fraud directive, the political map of the United States shifted instantly. And at the very center of that map, Minneapolis. Why? Because every federal agency working these cases, from DHS to HSI to Treasury, they kept circling back to the same city. The same programs, the same networks, and the same billion-dollar black hole that Stephen Miller now calls the greatest theft of taxpayer dollars ever recorded. Now, this wasn't random. This wasn't partisan. This was the math, guys. The numbers coming out of Minnesota, they were so large. They were so impossible. They were so structurally engineered that investigators concluded that the fraud wasn't accidental. It was clearly systemic. And so when they traced the pipelines, the daycares, the meal programs, medical billing, visa chains, they all converged on one epicenter where oversight had collapsed. This is why President Trump targeted Minnesota first, not because it was political, but because it was ground zero. And so to understand how Minnesota became the epicenter of the largest welfare fraud scandal in modern history, you got to understand the scale of what investigators uncovered. So if we start with Feeding Our Future, this is the now infamous program where taxpayer dollars meant to feed children, they were routed through these shell kitchens, fake nonprofits, and restaurants that were later tied to these political events. Well, then you layer on the daycare schemes, the facilities billing the state for children who never showed up, hours that were never worked, services that were never delivered, and then finally, the Medicaid angle. That's right. Medical providers fabricating visit logs, billing for home care tours that never happened, and manipulating reimbursement codes like a printing press. For years, federal analysts say that these schemes, they operated undisturbed. State leadership brushed off red flags. Oversight was practically non-existent. And before the fraud networks overlapped politically and socially, nobody pulled the brakes. Now, this wasn't one scandal. This was clearly an ecosystem. So as investigators started connecting the dots, Trump didn't wait. Trump said enough is enough. He launched a multi-agency federal strike force, quickly named the Fraud Police. And the moment that they hit Minneapolis, something changed. ICE teams started moving fast, targeting individuals. DHS confirmed that they had entered the country illegally or had exploited visa loopholes. 15 arrests in the first sweep. Come on. 5 confirmed Somali nationals, and according to DHS insiders, that was just the opening volley. What shocked people most wasn't even the arrests, it was the intelligence behind them. Now, these weren't some random pickups. Agents were working off files, off patterns, off of data that had been ignored for years. And as Trump's task force cross-checked visa records, welfare payments, and identity documentation, red flags lit up nationwide. This wasn't a local cleanup. This was the beginning of a federal purge. And Minneapolis, the city refusing to cooperate, just found itself at the center of a national storm. And before we go any further, let me tell you a quick story that really hit me hard. A viewer wrote in and told me that her cancer specialist, the doctor keeping her alive, suddenly stopped accepting her Medicare plan. She didn't know. Nobody warned her. She showed up for her appointment one day and the front desk told her that she wasn't covered. She said it felt like the floor dropped out from under her. And you know what? That happens every single day in this country because Medicare plans change silently behind the scenes. And this is why I partner with Chapter, because they review your coverage early for free for the Ron Yates community so that you never lose the specialists that keep you alive. And most people, they're already dialing the phone number at the bottom of your screen. 909-563-8279, or they're visiting askchapter.org/Ron because they don't want to be blindsided like she was. And speaking of real stories, Jennifer Broadwater, she sent me a message. She said, Ron, love Chapter. They were so nice. They got me a great plan that aren't on TV. I will never call that number on TV again, but I will call Chapter. Thanks again for recommending them. Jennifer, thank you. Seriously, messages like yours really remind me why I share this. Okay, so then came this political detonation. Stephen Miller went public. And when he said that this scandal represented the greatest theft of taxpayer dollars ever recorded, Washington stopped breathing. Miller wasn't just speaking rhetorically. He was speaking from federal briefings, from active investigation, from data showing that the combined fraud across Minnesota's Somali-linked networks could exceed $1 billion, with federal analysts estimating that up to 50% of all Somali visa approvals may contain fraudulent elements. Half, guys. Let that sink in, okay? 50%. Miller's warning wasn't just about money, it was about scale. If federal investigators confirmed systemic visa fraud, the fallout could trigger the largest visa revocation and deportation wave in American history. Tens of thousands of cases re-examined, files pulled, identities verified. This wasn't just a political talking point anymore. This was a federal alarm bell, and it sent shockwaves from Minneapolis all the way to Capitol Hill. And so here's where everything truly explodes. Once Stephen Miller's warning hit the national stage, HSI investigators, they began reopening old files, thousands of them. Some have been sitting untouched for nearly a decade, including one reviewed by a senior fraud investigator who claimed Ilhan Omar's immigration file showed unmistakable signs of marriage fraud. Now, according to him, the paperwork wasn't ambiguous, it wasn't unclear, it was fraud, according to him. But when the case was first raised years ago, the statute of limitations was already closing conveniently during an administration far less interested in pursuing immigration crimes. Now it's different. With Trump back in the office in 2025, nothing is off the table. In fact, investigators are pulling archived applications, cross-checking family networks, and they're verifying identity claims that went challenged or unchallenged for years. This is the domino effect, guys. If one case shows deliberate fraud, every connected visa becomes a potential review, and the network grows bigger and bigger and bigger. Drop a yes if you see where this is going, guys. And so just as federal agents prepared for larger operations, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, he did something that no one expected. He issued an executive order forbidding ICE from using city property, parking garages, public lots, staging areas, as rally points for federal raids. This wasn't symbolic. This was a direct confrontation with the Trump administration, folks. A sitting mayor attempting to block federal law enforcement from executing federal warrants tied to billion-dollar fraud investigations. City officials framed it as protecting the community. Washington saw it as obstruction, a political rebellion in broad daylight. And the timing couldn't have been more explosive. ICE was ramping up operations, SI was reopening files, and DHS was tracing visa patterns. Suddenly, the city was at the center of America's largest fraud investigation, and it was actively resisting the federal government. Trump's response was immediate. No city gets to shield criminal fraud. The battle lines were drawn, and Trump was done. So as federal investigators widened their search, something very fascinating and very telling started happening inside Minnesota's political class. Panic. Oh yeah, panic. They were losing it. Quiet meetings, closed-door strategy sessions, public statements that sounded more like damage control than leadership. But why? Well, I'll tell you why. Because once investigators followed the money, they found themselves brushing up against some of the state's most powerful Democratic figures. Campaign donations linked to individuals later indicted in the Feeding Our Future scandal. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar hosting these political events at a restaurant now tied to fraud. That doesn't look good. And then the bombshell, leaked audio of Attorney General Keith Ellison allegedly offering to help program operators who were worried about federal scrutiny. All of it kind of paints a picture, not of one isolated scheme, but more of a kind of a political ecosystem where fraudsters mingled with lawmakers and donors and advisors, talking about, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You know what I'm saying, guys? So when the federal spotlight swung toward Minnesota, it didn't just illuminate corruption, it illuminated connections. And those connections terrified the establishment. And then came the whistleblowers, and their story might be the most damning of all. According to multiple witnesses familiar with internal communications, Governor Tim Walz He warned about red flags in these programs 7 years ago, right when he took office. They claimed that they brought concerns directly to his team: suspicious billing patterns, daycare overbilling, nonprofit irregularities, unexplained growth in Somali-led contractors. And the response? Dead silence. No investigations, no audits, no pauses in funding. If these whistleblowers are telling the truth, and many people believe that they are, the fraud networks, they weren't just misled. They were allowed to grow. Because while federal agents were asleep during these previous administrations, state leaders were politically entangled, publicly supportive, or simply unwilling to confront what was happening under their noses. And this is why today's crackdown feels like a reckoning, not just for the fraudsters, but for everyone who ignored the warnings and for the taxpayers who got bent over and screwed. But just when America thought that the scandal was contained to Minnesota, boom, another shockwave hit. This time it was from Maine. Drop a Maine down below if you're happy to discover that there was more fraud being identified. So this time it was from Maine, where the investigators uncovered a Somali-led Medicaid fraud scheme that was looking eerily familiar. Same structure, same loopholes, same billing tricks. A whistleblower revealed that Gateway Community Services, run by a Somali-American CEO who later campaigned for a political office in Somalia, had allegedly fabricated visit logs, billed for hours never worked, and even handed out $2,000 bonuses to employees who had never even met a single client. Sound familiar? Because it is. It's Minnesota's script, copied and pasted across state lines. And when federal auditors took a random sample, they found $94,000 in fraudulent billing in just one slice of 1 year, meaning the real number is likely exponentially higher. Now, this wasn't coincidence. This is a pattern, a blueprint for exploiting Medicaid systems designed to rely on trust. And the trust had clearly been shattered. And so while ICE, HSI, and DHS were chasing criminal fraud, another hammer dropped, this time from Washington's healthcare side. Dr. Mehmet Oz, now leading the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, issued a stark ultimatum to Minnesota: fix the fraud or lose federal funding. Not symbolic funding, core Medicaid dollars that support thousands of vulnerable residents. CMS demanded audits of 14 high-risk programs, identified systemic failures, and warned that ongoing fraud posed a threat to the integrity of the national program. And this wasn't just bureaucratic pressure. This was a timeline. Minnesota had 60 days to clean up a mess that had grown for years. Group home licenses were frozen, funding pipelines were halted, nonprofits panicked, but CMS made it clear: we will not bankroll corruption. And for the first time, the financial survival of Minnesota's social program was directly tied to the success or failure of Trump's crackdown. And as the federal cleanup intensified, one of the most heartbreaking side effects began to surface: legitimate disability programs. Folks who may be on SSI or SSDI Social Security programs that truly serve some of Minnesota's most vulnerable people, found themselves caught in the crossfire. Audits tightening, funding stalled, providers who had done nothing wrong, they were suddenly forced to cut hours or even shut down entirely, simply because the system around them had become so saturated with fraud that CMS could no longer separate the honest people from the corrupt without sweeping everything at once. So, home care agencies, they pleaded with the state, warning that disabled clients who needed 16 hours of care a day might only receive 6. Nonprofits are saying that they were weeks away from total collapse, but federal investigators, they held the line. So after years of unchecked theft, they said this pain wasn't optional, it was necessary. Because if the scammers weren't flushed out, they would just keep on stealing forever. And now this kind of brings us to where America stands tonight. All right, on the brink of a political and legal showdown unlike anything we've seen in modern history. Federal agencies are pulling visa files, prosecutors are demanding indictments, HSI is preparing cases that could lead to tens of thousands of visa revocations if fraud is confirmed. Meanwhile, Minneapolis leadership is digging in, framing Trump's crackdown as political overreach, while federal agents insist it's nothing less than a national emergency. Two forces, one demanding accountability and the other one demanding autonomy. They are now on a collision course, and the flashpoint isn't even Washington, D.C. It's Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is the tipping point, folks. This is the reckoning. This is the moment where the largest fraud investigation in American history meets the political resistance of an entire city. And tonight, Judgment Day has only just begun. Hit the like button, subscribe, share. We'll see you next time.